There's a particular kind of silence you only hear when you're far enough from people. Not just the hush that comes after a snowfall, or the stillness in a library, but something deeper, older. It wraps itself around you and presses against your ears like a slow tide. It doesn't just mean quiet. It means alone. And that's the reason I come here. Coldroot Lake lies hidden in the folds of the forest. Its surface like slate and its shape uneven, fed by unseen veins of underground water. There's no beach, no docks, and no cabins. Just a narrow deer trail leading down a steep bank, where you can haul a boat into the water if you're stubborn enough. I don't think it even shows up on local maps anymore, which is why most people don't know it exists. I come out to the lake whenever I want the world to vanish for a while. No cell towers, no engines, and, most importantly, no other people. Just me, the water, and whatever book I've decided to lose myself in. There's just something about reading on water that makes the words sink deeper. The stillness cradles you. It clears the noise. This time, I brought something strange. I found it 2 days ago in a dusty second-hand bookshop, tucked behind the bakery in town. It's the kind of place you don't notice until you look for it. There's no sign, just a crooked door and the smell of mildew and paper wafting out from the crack. I went in on a whim. Most of the shelves were half empty, leaning like gravestones. They were stuffed with outdated encyclopedias and faded romance novels, with their covers half torn. But in the far back, behind a stack of vinyl records and broken globes, was a small wooden crate. And inside it was a book that looked like it didn't belong. There was no title, no author, just a leather-bound volume with dry curling edges, the surface worn smooth by time, or hands. When I picked it up, the leather was warm, not just sun-warmed, but something else. It tingled faintly against my palm, like static. Inside, the handwriting was cramped and delicate, the ink so dark it looked almost wet. The pages had a smell I couldn't quite place. Not mold or rot, something earthy, something like river silt or old roots. I bought the book without a word. The shopkeeper gave me a look but didn't ask questions. I don't think he even knew it was there. And now it sat in my lap as the little boat drifted, my oars pulled in and resting under the seat. I had rowed out to the middle, where the water goes black and deep, and let the lake take me. The boat, an old aluminum shell I had patched together myself, shifted gently with the motion of the water. I just leaned back, propped one foot on the edge, and let the trees spin slowly around me. There's something ancient about this place. The forest presses close to the shore, all pine and birch, thick enough that you can see more than 10 feet between the trunks. Their reflections reach down into the water, like long shadows, waving slowly with the surface. Occasionally, I would see a dragonfly skimming across the stillness, or a bird flitting across the canopy, but otherwise nothing. Even the bugs were quiet. I opened the book. The first page was blank, save for a smudge of ink in the top corner, like a fingerprint. The next held a single line, written in slanted script. To read is to invite. To speak is to return. I let out a soft breath and turned the page again. The story itself began simply, with the description of a man traveling through the woods in search of a place he could be alone. The handwriting was so fine I had to squint in the sunlight, and even then, it shifted faintly, like it was resisting me. The tale described the man rowing across a still lake, the trees pressing close, and the sky heavy and grey. The details felt strange. His breath fogged though it was midsummer, and his skin prickled with cold. I looked up from the book, suddenly aware of the temperature. It wasn't cold, not exactly, but the sun had dipped behind a curtain of clouds, soft and grey. The air felt heavier now, like the lake had breathed in and was holding it. I turned another page. The man in the story found a book, also old, also without title. The pages described how he read it aloud, though he didn't realize he was doing it. I frowned slightly. The parallels were odd, but not impossible. Coincidence, maybe, or clever writing. I glanced at the book's spine. It was still unmarked, so I read on. After a while, the words blurred slightly. The pages felt soft beneath my fingertips, not like paper, but like something older, like pressed cloth. The ink seemed darker now, bled into the fibers like veins. But the man in the book kept reading, and so did I. Time passed in a way I didn't measure. The sun had shifted again, dipping lower and sending angled shadows over the treetops. My boat drifted, turning slowly, lazily, as if pulled by something I couldn't see. I closed the book for a moment and listened. No wind, no birds, no frogs, nothing. Just the faint lap of water against the hull. And yet, I didn't feel afraid. At least, not yet. There was a kind of peace here, a strange and ancient stillness that made the world feel far away, as if I were floating above it all, outside of time itself. I let myself lean back against the edge of the boat, the book resting against my chest. I must have dozed off, just for a minute. When I opened my eyes again, the light had changed. Not necessarily darker, just wrong. The clouds above me were thicker now, tinged with a sickly yellow, like old bruises on paper. The lake itself was perfectly still. Too still, perhaps, like the water had frozen mid-motion, and I was caught inside it. Even the boat wasn't swaying anymore. It just sat there, anchored by nothing, not drifting or bobbing. The forest itself also felt further away, as if the shoreline had retreated while I slept. I slowly sat up, blinking. The book had fallen open across my lap, and one sentence filled both pages. You are in it now. A breeze stirred the air for the first time in hours. It carried the scent of damp wood and something else, something faintly metallic. I closed the book, holding it against my chest, and looked out across the lake. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. Not wrong exactly, just not mine anymore. I didn't feel cold, not in any physical way, but something in me had begun to recoil, like a part of my mind that was deeper than thought had finally registered that something was wrong in a way no warmth could protect me from. I stayed seated in the boat. Moving felt inappropriate somehow, like a trespass, like the air itself would punish sound. The book lay in my lap again. It was closed now, its cover dark with moisture that hadn't been there before. The ink, or whatever it was, had begun to bleed ever so faintly along the edges, as if the thing were breathing through its pages. I glanced at the oarlocks, still empty, still impossibly empty. They hadn't fallen overboard. I would have heard that. There was no splash, no movement, no drifting. They just disappeared. I tried to remember the last time I touched them. Maybe when I arrived, or when I stopped rowing. Had they ever been here? A thought surfaced then, ugly and sudden. How long have I been out here? I looked up. The sky was still dim, grey, but not with the texture of clouds. More like a thick sheet of wet ash, pressed above the trees. I desperately tried to judge the hour. Afternoon, maybe, or evening. But the light didn't shift. It stayed exactly where it was, suspended and stale. Time had become a still pool. The water around me no longer shimmered. It didn't reflect, not even a dull glint. It was no longer water in any familiar sense. It was depth, not movement, not mirror, just down. I leaned over the edge and looked into it. Something about the silence was changing. It felt fuller now, like the lake had begun to listen. Every breath I took felt weight. I became hyper-aware of my heartbeat, my pulse thudding faintly in my ears, and each inhale sounded like thunder in this quiet. The forest began to feel wrong. The trees still stood around me in a loose ring, but they had ceased being trees. They no longer swayed, or bent, or creaked. Their branches reached out like arms held in place, and each one felt like a figure watching from the edge. The pattern they formed was too symmetrical now, too still. I blinked and looked again. It was the same as before, but kind of different. I looked back at the book. Its cover was damp, too damp. Not wet with rain or dew, but something thicker. The leather felt swollen under my fingertips, as if it had been submerged and only just begun to surface again. The surface itself bulged slightly in the middle, like something inside was straining outward. I opened it slowly. Blank pages. Then one fresh ink. The strokes shimmered faintly, too dark, like oil on paper. The pattern they formed was too symmetrical now, too still. I looked back at the book. Its cover was damp, not wet with rain or dew, but with something thicker. The leather felt swollen under my fingertips, as if it had been submerged and only just begun to surface again. The book itself bulged slightly in the middle, like something inside was straining outward. I slowly opened it. Blank pages. Then one with fresh ink. The strokes shimmered faintly, too dark, like oil on paper. You have entered the hollow. You spoke without knowing. And it hurt you. My breath caught. That last word lingered. It hurt you. A concept rather than a creature, but the implication sat in my chest like a stone. I closed the book again and set it on the bench beside me, suddenly unwilling to keep it in my lap. The moment I let it go, I felt a strange relief in my legs, like I had been carrying something heavy without knowing it. The air felt closer now, thick enough that each breath came with effort. I took another long look around. I tried to focus on details, anything I could use to orient myself. But it all felt smoothed over, as though someone had painted the scene but left the layers too soft. There were no birds overhead, no clouds moving, no insects buzzing near the surface, and no sounds from the woods, no distant calls, no cracking twigs, no wind in the leaves. nothing. Even the water didn't ripple anymore. My boat kind of floated in perfect suspension, as though the whole surface had become solid. Not really frozen, just fixed, like a painting behind glass. I hesitantly reached into the water with my hand. The surface didn't resist. My finger slid through easily, cool and soft like silk. But as I pushed deeper, I noticed something strange. There was no gradation in the temperature, no deepening chill, no shifting pressure, just the same soft resistance all the way down. I withdrew my hand and shook off the water. It clung to my skin a second longer than it should have, like something reluctant to let go. I wiped it on my pants, then stopped. There was no sound, not even that, no rustle of fabric, no slap of wet against dry, just movement in a vacuum. I stared down at my legs, waiting for a noise that never came. And then I heard it. A sound, not made by me. Not above me, but below. Soft, deliberate. Not the sound of something breaking the surface, but beneath it, dull and distant, like a long breath taken deep in the water, or a slow shifting of weight in the black. I leaned forward without meaning to, not out of bravery, not out of fear, just curiosity, or maybe inevitability. The lake had a presence now, a shape I couldn't see, but could feel. Not really movement, more a suggestion of motion, like being watched from behind a door. Not the creak, but the sense of something waiting on the other side of it. I didn't move for a long time, not out of paralysis, just resignation, the way you sit quietly when the storm is coming, not to avoid it, but to witness it, to prepare yourself for the part where you're no longer the center of the story, just a page turning, a leaf floating. The boat gave a soft groan beneath me, like something had touched it, or brushed past. I looked down again, slower this time. The water did not stir, but something else did, deep inside of me. Some awareness too old to be called fear, not panic or dread, recognition, as though I had heard the story before, not in words, but in the marrow, as if this had all been waiting, not just for me to find it, but for me to read it, to speak it aloud, to bring it back. The book sat beside me, utterly still. I did not want to open it again, but I would. I knew I would. Not because I had to, but because the lake had made room for me. Because I was already part of it. And because the next page had already begun to write itself. The pages had begun to turn without my permission. Subtle, slow, as if moved by breath or tide, rather than fingers. each one lifting with the languid grace of something half asleep and ancient. Their motion so soft that I might have mistaken it for the wind, had there been any wind at all. But there was no breeze, no air that moved. The forest surrounding me remained utterly still, its trees caught in a strange paralysis, their trunks tall and straight like frozen sentinels, and the sky above, dim and undistinguished, had taken on the thick oppressive tone of ash in water, a false light that neither rose nor fell. When the final page settled, it did so with weight, as though some unseen hand had chosen it for me, as though the act of reading had never truly been mine to begin with. The paper beneath my fingers was no longer dry. It had absorbed the damp of the air, or the breath of the lake, or perhaps something deeper, something from below. And the words written upon it were not made with ink, but with something darker, denser, a wet, clotted smear that throbbed faintly with a heat I couldn't explain. The letters themselves bled into one another, not sloppily but with purpose, as if each stroke had been etched with a trembling urgency, like a warning written at the edge of drowning. They weren't phrases so much as impressions, jagged, primal and sharp-edged. Yet I understood them not through language, but in the pit of my own body, in the back of my throat, where the pressure of the atmosphere had begun to tighten, like a hand closing slowly around my windpipe. It is beneath. It waits. It remembers. It rises. I tried to close the book, not out of fear exactly, but because the air around it had changed. It felt warmer than the rest of the boat, like it was breathing, like it was alive. And I no longer wanted it resting in my lap. It pressed into my thighs like a thing that had begun to reshape itself against my own body. But the cover would not shut. My fingers pushed and curled and strained. Yet the spine held firm, as though the book had stiffened against me, resisting my efforts with silence and unyielding will. There was no sound when I let go. The book did not fall with the soft thud of leather on wood. It didn't bounce or slide. It simply ceased to be present. One moment it was there, flush against the plank beside me, heavy with pages and soaked with the smell like mold or blood. And in the next moment, it was gone, not vanished into the water, not dropped overboard, but simply gone, as if the lake had claimed it without even rippling. For a long moment, I just sat there. Then, suddenly, something shifted beneath the boat. Gently at first, a subtle roll, like a long spine, turning in the dark. Then, a second movement, heavier, more deliberate. Not enough to tip me, but enough to remind me how thin the floor of my world truly was. I froze, not in fear, but in surrender, in helplessness. I felt it. I truly felt it. The lake was no longer a body of water. It was a mouth, a vast and dreaming thing that had been waiting for language, for recognition, for someone foolish enough to speak its name in the form of a story. I had given it words. I had filled its lungs. And now it was beginning to breathe. The boat tilted gently as something passed beneath it again, slower this time, but broader, like a massive form, circling just out of reach, not attacking or rushing, just rising. I wanted to move, to reach for the edges of the vessel, to scream or jump, or do anything that felt human. But my body refused. Not paralyzed, but transfixed. The way a child might freeze before a cave. Not because he believes in monsters, but because he hopes they're real. And they are. The air changed again, colder now, not in temperature but in emotion. A shift in moods. The lake had begun to regard me. Then something breached. Not the surface, not fully, just a swell, a dome of water rising slightly, enough to suggest the curve of a skull, or a shoulder, or a form too large to name. The shape did not linger. It dipped back into the water without sound or splash, like it had only risen to smell the air, or to smell me. And I could no longer tell where the story ended and I began. The lake, the book, the creature below, none of it had ever been separate. They were parts of the same whole, written across time and silt and silence, waiting only for someone to sit still long enough to be read in return. The sky above me dimmed, though no sun had ever truly shone. The forest faded into suggestion, and the boat, once solid and real beneath me, now felt thin, as though it floated not on water, but on memory. The voice returned, softer now, almost kind. The page is written, the binding is done. Now turn. And though the book was gone, I felt it beneath my hands. I felt its weight. And I did turn. Not to escape, not to end, but to be part of something older than fear. The last word was not spoken. It was swallowed by the dark. And beneath me, the lake opened its eye.